A major and deeply concerning development has surfaced in the ongoing search for Nancy Guthrie. The 84-year-old mother of Savannah Guthrie vanished in the early hours of February 1st, setting off an intense and wide-reaching search that has continued without pause. For decades, Nancy had been known as a calm, reliable presence, someone who quietly held her family together through both joyful celebrations and painful hardships. Even in her later years, she remained the emotional foundation of her family, widely recognized as the kind of mother and grandmother who never overlooked a birthday, never failed to return a call, and never broke a promise she had made. Her life took a dramatic turn in 1989 when her husband, Charles, passed away suddenly due to a heart attack. At just 47 years old, Nancy found herself facing an overwhelming loss, while also being thrust into the responsibility of raising 3 children on her own. Though she felt the weight of grief deeply, she chose to bury that pain beneath a strong sense of duty. Friends and acquaintances often described her as both practical and remarkably resilient. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper, gave her time to church activities, and made certain that her modest home in Tucson remained a place of comfort and security. As she raised Savannah, Annie, and Cam, she consistently emphasized the importance of family, instilling values that would shape their lives. While Savannah's career eventually brought her into the national spotlight, Nancy remained in the background, quietly supportive and never seeking attention. To those around her, Nancy appeared completely devoted to the memory of her late husband. She spoke of him with gentleness, kept his photograph displayed prominently in her living room, and never showed interest in pursuing another relationship. This image of unwavering loyalty became central to how others saw her. Yet, beneath that carefully maintained identity, another life was slowly taking form, far from Tucson. It did not begin in any dramatic or reckless way. Instead, it started subtly during a church retreat in Santa Fe in 1991. She had told her children she needed time for reflection and spiritual healing, which was entirely true, as she was still processing her loss. However, during that retreat, she encountered someone who would quietly change the direction of her life. That person was Victor Ramirez, a widowed artist from Mexico City who owned a small but respected gallery in Santa Fe. He was vastly different from anyone Nancy had known before. Where her late husband Charles had been reserved and grounded, Victor was expressive, passionate, and deeply connected to his emotions. He spoke about art with a level of intensity that others might reserve for faith itself, believing that life was meant to be experienced fully, even when it brought pain. Nancy found herself drawn to his warmth and creative energy. At first, their connection was rooted in shared grief, in conversations about loss and the emptiness that follows it. Those conversations gradually turned into long walks through the streets of Santa Fe, and over time, those walks evolved into something far more meaningful. When Nancy returned to Tucson after the retreat, she carried more than just grief with her. There was also a quiet sense of possibility that had begun to take root. Over the following months, she found reasons to return to Santa Fe, telling her children she was attending additional retreats or helping friends. In reality, she was spending time with Victor. What began as companionship slowly deepened into love, placing her in a difficult position between 2 identities. In Tucson, she remained the devoted mother and widow. In Santa Fe, she was becoming someone entirely different. Victor eventually gave her a nickname inspired by a novel they both cherished, calling her Elena. He felt the name reflected a brighter, freer side of her personality, one that rarely surfaced in her everyday life. At first, it was simply a private joke between them, but over time, the name took on a deeper meaning. Elena became a version of Nancy who laughed more easily, dressed with more expression, and allowed herself to imagine a future beyond grief. By the mid-1990s, her visits to Santa Fe had become a regular part of her life. She would drive 8 hours each way, often telling her children she needed solitude or was visiting distant relatives. During her time in Santa Fe, Nancy became increasingly involved in Victor's gallery. Her bookkeeping experience proved invaluable, as she helped organize events and keep track of sales. Eventually, she even displayed a few of her own small paintings under a pseudonym. To the people in Santa Fe, She was not Nancy Guthrie. She was Elena, Victor's thoughtful and composed partner, known for her keen eye for art and her steady presence during exhibitions. She even opened a modest bank account under the name Elena Ramirez, contributing some of her earnings to support the gallery. For her, it was never about money. It was about building something separate, something that belonged only to that part of her life. For nearly 30 years, Nancy carefully balanced these two worlds. In Tucson, she fulfilled her role as a mother and grandmother, attending school events, caring for grandchildren, and hosting family gatherings. In Santa Fe, she immersed herself in art, philosophy, and a sense of personal freedom she had not felt in years. She believed she could maintain both lives indefinitely, as long as she remained careful. To protect her secret, she avoided digital records, relied on handwritten letters, and kept their correspondence hidden in a locked box beneath her bed. Victor occasionally encouraged her to tell her children the truth, expressing that he did not want to remain hidden forever. However, Nancy consistently refused. She feared that revealing her relationship would shatter the image her children had of her. She worried they would feel betrayed or believe she had replaced their father. And so, she continued living as two separate individuals, Nancy in Tucson and Elena in Santa Fe, never imagining that these two worlds would one day collide. As time passed, maintaining this dual existence became more difficult. By the early 2000s, her children had grown more independent, giving her greater freedom to spend extended periods in Santa Fe. What started as short visits gradually turned into longer stays, sometimes lasting a week or more. She planned each trip meticulously, using burner phones, cash payments, and handwritten notes to ensure there were no digital traces connecting her two lives. Despite her careful efforts, the burden of secrecy weighed heavily on her. As Savannah's career continued to rise, bringing more public attention, Nancy's anxiety grew. She feared that even a small mistake could expose everything. Unfamiliar phone calls and curious looks from neighbors began to unsettle her. Still, she pressed on, convincing herself that her choices were justified. Her children were thriving, and her time as Elena gave her a sense of freedom she could not find elsewhere. By late 2025, however, signs began to emerge that her carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. Financial records revealed a transfer of $5,000 to an unknown account in Mexico. Around the same time, Nancy noticed strange occurrences, including unusual phone calls and a car that seemed to linger near her Tucson home. Her sense of unease deepened, but she remained determined to keep her secret intact. In the final days of January 2026, her fear intensified. She began to feel watched, uncertain of who she could trust. On the night of January 31st, she was last seen at home after a family dinner. By the next morning, her pacemaker had stopped functioning, and small drops of blood were found both inside and outside her home. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of robbery, only a growing sense of mystery. At first, her family believed her disappearance might be connected to Savannah's public life. However, that theory changed when an unmarked envelope arrived at Savannah's apartment in New York. Inside was a faded photograph showing a younger Nancy with an unfamiliar man outside a cafe in Santa Fe. Written on the back was a simple but chilling message: "Ask about Elena." That single clue was enough to unravel decades of secrecy. The revelation left her children stunned. They were forced to confront the reality that their mother had lived a completely separate life for over 30 years. Investigators soon traced the photograph back to Santa Fe, where the truth began to emerge. When questioned, Victor Ramirez, now 80, confirmed their long relationship. He explained how Nancy, under the name Elena Ramirez, had been deeply involved in his gallery, helping manage operations, curate exhibits, and even contribute her own artwork. He also described the lengths she went to in order to protect her identity, including hidden letters, burner phones, and cash transactions. According to Victor, Nancy had always justified her secrecy by focusing on her children's well-being and the importance of preserving their image of her. Despite everything, he insisted that their relationship had been genuine and meaningful. As investigators began to piece together the evidence, including the missing locked box that likely contained years of correspondence, the unexplained financial transfer, and Nancy's growing fear. The case became increasingly complex. Her children struggled to process the truth, dealing with feelings of shock, confusion, and betrayal. At the same time, they began to see a different side of their mother, one that reflected her desire for personal fulfillment alongside her dedication to family. Public interest in the case grew rapidly, with speculation ranging from blackmail to jealousy. Victor temporarily closed his gallery as attention focused on Santa Fe. Those who knew Elena described her as kind, creative, and quietly influential, emphasizing the stark contrast between her two identities. As the investigation moved further into February 2026, authorities continued examining financial records, travel histories, and personal communications, trying to connect the events in Tucson with her life in Santa Fe. The missing locked box remained a key piece of the puzzle, and the possibility that someone had uncovered her secret added yet another layer of uncertainty. For her family, the emotional toll was immense. Savannah, Annie, and Cam were left trying to reconcile the mother they had always known with the hidden life she had led. Questions remained unanswered. Was her disappearance linked to someone discovering her secret? Was it the result of coercion or something else entirely? In the end, the story of Nancy Guthrie, also known as Elena Ramirez, became far more than a missing person case. It revealed a deeply human conflict between responsibility and desire, loyalty and independence, and the challenges of living two separate lives. While her disappearance remains unresolved, it has exposed the complexity, sacrifice, and secrecy that can exist within a single life, serving as a powerful reminder that even those we believe we know completely may carry hidden worlds within them.